near my house today, and it was feeling a bit like spring. It was beautifully warm for a few days there. Things had really started bursting out of the ground, getting green, and it was glorious conditions. So I thought and we were inspired last week when it was last Thursday. It was already getting quite warm and cozy. So inspired by that, we thought we'd focus on spring and things. However, it's turned cold again, and so the trees and the plants have changed their mind and have gone back into themselves a wee bit. But there are a few spring-like things we can look at, and we'll come to the birch trees in a sec. But for now, I'm going to turn my camera around and show you something just here. So yeah, this is a non-native brought in by the Romans, probably, which we've looked at in the past. Anyone remember the name of this one here? It's very young, so it's less easy to identify. The leaves get to be about that big when they're a bit older.
Is it ground elder?
It is indeed ground elder. Thanks, Alistair. Yeah, so ground elder, and it's just beginning to appear this time of year. So it's a good time of year to collect it. And if you have it in your garden, it spreads and takes over. And as I never cease to amuse myself by pointing out how I heard described on Gardener's Question Time on the BBC, there's two ways to get rid of ground elder in your garden. One is to concrete it, and the other one is to move house. I found a third way, which is to have chickens, and the chickens love it. So I'm actually collecting these greens, possibly for me and Emma to eat later, but I'll probably give it to the chickens because they love their greens so much. But another plant that's just beginning to appear now is clavers or sticky willy. Oh, this one's quite big actually, or sticky willy. You can see that there. Oh, Sarah can't get in. Emma, do you have your phone? Can you Facebook message Sarah the number? So yeah, sticky willy here. It gets nice and sticky, and it will it's all these little hairs, so it will stick to your leg. Oh, there we go. No, Sarah found her way in. So yes, it'll stick to clothes. Great fun, but it's actually really good eating because of all these little hairs on it. They're made of silica, which is like grass. Not grass, glass. They're not very pleasant to eat until you steam them. So if you put them in with your little pot of greens, they're good eating. And yeah, you can eat them raw, but better steamed. Same as the ground elder. It's lovely raw this time of year when it's young and fresh, but even better steamed as a sort of pot green. So I'm actually collecting a few of these here. And but that's enough harvesting. We'll harvest more later. Those are just for the time being. We'll get onto that anon. Yes, check out your spring greens, just beginning to appear. Oh, and I've got a springing dog trying to get involved with me. So yeah, as Stephen mentioned, as I mentioned, we're going to do a bit of tree tapping. Now, I was going to tap the birch tree for sap, but I've already tapped a demonstration birch tree yesterday, which I will show you guys later on and see how much sap's risen. But as I say, it's gone a bit cold, so probably not so much. But instead of actually a birch tree, today the demonstration I'm going to do is on a sycamore tree. The sycamore trees are a type of maple, and so their sap is quite rich in sugars. So if you collect your birch sap, I think it takes about 200 gallons to make birch sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup, of birch syrup, whereas maple syrup you only need about 50 to 100 gallons to make 1 gallon. It's still a lot and a faff, but
What you want to do, right, Mum?
sorry? What was that? I missed that comment. Yes, so I was going to collect. So I'm going to show you the birch tree that I tapped yesterday, and we'll see how much we collected. And today, I'm going to demonstrate the technique which you same on both trees with a sycamore tree here, which, as I say, is tapping maple. So the classic way of tapping a tree is you make a hole in it, and you put in a bit of wood, and out comes some water, some sap. Now, what we're going to do, what we're going to do here is, so there's different ways of doing it. Now, if you do it this way, it does damage the tree a bit. So it's best not to do it. Well, the way I'm going to show you, Stephen's way, is a better way of doing it. But I'm going to show you a bushcrafty way. Well, I'm going to show you the principles of bushcrafty way. So you get a round twig, you just shave it off, make it big, half thickness. So you've got a flat side and a rounded side. Then you sharpen one end to a bit of a tapered point. And then you go to your tree, and using a knife, you can drill in and make a hole. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to hurt the tree. Then that hole, you stick your, this is like, basically you call this a spiel. You stick it in. Now you want the hole at about almost 40 degrees. So it's angling down from the tree. And you have the flat end on the flat side on the bottom. And you just peg that in, bash it in with another stick or with the back of your knife. Bash in, stuck in the hole. And the sap, as it rises up, as the tree starts soaking up the nutrients from their roots and from the ground and water from the ground, turning it into this rich, sugary, lovely sap, will be rising up to get all these beautiful little buds. Oh, you can see here some of these buds just swelling up, ready to burst. So it's just about time to start tapping. So these buds need all the moisture to fill up. And so it's all coming up. And we'll start leaking out the hole. And it'll dribble down the spiel you made. And then you put a pot underneath. The dog thinks that this is for her, so she can have it.
Caroline's loving the Corvid commentary.
Oh, yes, it's very nice.
I love that. The Corvid commentary.
It's a good Corvid commentary. We've got a lovely population of crows here in Rafford. There's actually a couple of families of them. One rookery here with maybe 100 or so, and then there's another one over there with about 50 or 80, and then there's another one further up the hill. And they mix and match and join forces a bit. So yeah, as I say, you can do this with your birch tree, you can do this with your sycamore tree, your maple tree. But every time you make a hole into it, you are opening it up to diseases, infections from bacteria, fungi, viruses. And even though afterwards you would always make a bigger peg and bash that in to seal the hole to stop it bleeding, because it's basically sap is bleeding. And that would seal it up, but it still does damage the wood. And if you try it on the birch tree and then a year later or more years later, chop down the tree and see a cross section, you'll see in a cross section of the trunk where the taps have gone in, how the wood is all discolored and damaged around it. The tree still survives and does fine, but if we can avoid doing that, then I would advise us to do that. And so sycamore and maples, they use these taps all the time. You get special made ones. But for birch trees, often they're a bit smaller, so it's even more damaging for them. So we're going to do a different way of doing it. What you need to do is find yourself a nice upright branch. We're going to use this one here. So a nice upright branch that's sticking up like that. And then you get your secateurs. Now you can do this with a knife, the old bushcrafty, but frankly secateurs are easier. Genuinely, the infection is quite a significant risk for trees and for all things cut. So I'm going to sterilize it with a bit of flame. Ooh, get the wind behind my back. So the heat from the flame is going to sterilize it so that the tree does not run a risk of infection. I know those of us who garden, we don't do that very often. And the trees will probably be fine. But just to be the best possible practice I'm demonstrating here. Now, we want to choose a bit up from where these joins are. It's going to be the same on a birch tree, same on the sycamore tree. So there's nice branches. They've got lots of nodes here. So this branch is going to be really happy and healthy, even if we take the end off. And I'm going to pick above this node here. I'm going to cut at 45 degrees away from the tree, like that. And we have a cut. Now, when the tree starts pumping its water into its roots and the roots start releasing all the sugars and nutrients they've stored over winter, and it comes up to the leaves that were there, it's going to leak out the end here. Now, we're going to want to catch that. Many ways of doing this. Now, if we did this, if the weather had stayed warm, or if we waited another week or two, then you'd see the sap dripping out already. But as I say, it got cold again, the trees dried up, changed their mind, and also it's just a little bit early. Now, I'm going to pull this so it's facing downwards with my bit of cordage here, paracord. This is white, a fisherman's paracord, because it's easy to see and keep the bar and bolt. Wrapping that round there. We're going to do that a little bit more. So that's a nice angle there, nice and taut. Doing a round turn of 2 half hitches. If you know your knots. If you do not know your knots, you should know your knots, and we'll teach you knots at another point. Knots are not optional. Okay. Doing it on the bend, so it's easy to undo. Right, now we need to catch this. Oh no, it's beginning to come out. This is great. So what I have here, a bit of upcycling. You just make out the moisture coming in there. I don't know if you can see that.
Hard to see.
There is a drop of moisture
Yeah.
about to drop out there. That's brilliant. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a bottle here to catch it like that. Obviously the bottle would just fall off, so a little bit more on my paracord. For those of you into knots, I'm going to do a clove hitch. Many ways of doing a clove hitch. Okay. A cute way is make 2 spectacles, cross them over to a monocle, put it on, and that'll hang there neatly. Slot our tube onto here, and then we're going to tie this on. Now, I could have made this branch a bit steeper, but it was quite strong. But that, because we're not going to be collecting a lot, I'll come back tomorrow and check this. And yeah, it's not going to fill up too high. So that's going to stay there nice and secure. Now, as this sap comes out, it's going to be very sugary and very tasty. And that's going to, of course, attract me and Emma, but it's also going to attract lots of bugs and beasties. And we don't want them coming in to Rafford. It's fine if they come in, but you know, they'll probably drown. It's not very nice for them, and then we'd have to sieve them out. So I've got a strip of spare fabric here. Just going to wrap that around. That's just going to cut out most of the bugs and beasties from coming in. Also, dual purpose, it's bright yellow, so it's easy for me to spot it and find out where I was in the woods. I know these woods fairly well, but if I was using another bit of woods, this might be quite useful.
I'm just gonna
Oh, and the dog's
tilting
doing
this to me.
dog's being a dog in the background. Just ignore that. Anyway, so that's going to stay there. Now it's going to collect up, hopefully, some sap. And as I can say, there's a first drop already coming out.
Oh, look, I can see it on the bottle.
Oh yeah, the first drop running down inside the bottle already. So later on in the year, so in a week's time, or if it just warms up a bit, you'll actually see it dripping almost constantly, and we'll fill this up in 24 hours. You could take that back, drink it as a health drink as it is, or boil it down. And that much, as I was saying with the proportions earlier, that much sap with a sycamore or a maple would boil down to maybe that much syrup. Not a lot, but you'd have to use about this much sap with a birch tree to get about that much syrup. Either one's good to drink, or you can turn them into lovely wines and all sorts. Right.
Is it easy to turn it from sap to syrup?
It is quite easy to turn it sap to syrup. You just have to boil it very, very low, gentle simmer, and just boil it till the moisture evaporates away. Sorry, I should have said that.
Thank you.
So yeah, you have it in a pot and just boil it. Keep turning every now and then, and it'll just boil down and evaporate away. Okay, I'm going to take the camera back off the awesome camera ladies. Thank you, Emma and Percy. And we're going to move on here. So, yes, as I say, you can apply that to birch trees. You can apply that to any tree. But most trees, well, not all trees have the right sap. So it's going to be nice and tasty and useful. Oh, great. The dog's got a giant stick. So, yes, as I said, we're going to focus on birch trees a bit today. Now, birch trees are incredibly useful trees for all sorts of things. Collecting their sap, which you can then drink. It's supposed to have all sorts of health-giving properties. I don't know if that's true, but if you believe in it, it certainly is. And it might actually be true as well. What you believe is probably the most important thing with these things, I suspect. And you can chop down a tree and you can cook it up and in a charcoal kiln, and you'll get two things out of it. You're using, especially using slightly green wood. One, you'll get charcoal at the end. Two, you will then have the black tar from the green wood as it's cooking will dribble out the bottom of your charcoal kiln, and you can get this lovely pitch, which you can use for waterproofing your Viking longship, or for sealing your roof, or for all sorts of things. Very useful stuff. Now, here is the birch tree that I tapped yesterday, but as I say, I'm not very optimistic. No. We've got a few drops in there, not a huge amount. But actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this down. Thank you. Now, not a lot has appeared. And rather than leaving this to keep collecting, I'm going to take this down just to tidy up. As you can see, a nice clean cut, so it'll be quick and easy to heal. Now, because I strung this up under tension, it will spring up a bit there, and just means gravity will help it a bit in its healing, so that the sap will, as it comes out, will seal over and heal it. Now, I was talking to a tree surgeon friend of ours and asking, because I've heard before with some plants, when you cut a plant, you should seal up the wound with a bit of hot wax to prevent infection getting in, which makes sense. You disinfect it first. But she said that the research recently has shown that if you're going to injure a tree like this, it's best to actually let it heal naturally and cleanly like that without sealing it up. So we're not going to seal that up with anything. We're just going to let it heal. And with all the sap coming out, it'll heal over a scar very quickly and grow on perfectly, as you all know from pruning your trees in the winter. Anyway, so that's going to stay there. Now, I'm trying to think. I've got a few more things. Tell you what, I'm just going to, actually, if I've not got too many twigs on my face, I'll stay here. So we're going to be looking at a few different things. We're going to look at a few different things after Stephen's story and movement. But before I hand over to Stephen, I just want to show you how to collect the one of the items we're going to need for our craft project that I'm going to offer you as something to do. So we're going to be doing stuff with birch bark, but also you'll need some cordage, and one of the loveliest cordages for making stuff with is spruce roots. So what you do, first of all, find yourself a nice medium to large size spruce tree. This one will do. Other roots are available and acceptable. But what we're going to do is we can use this one here.
How do you know it's a spruce?
How do we know it's a spruce? This one is harder to tell because the needles are further up. But if you've got the needles low down, you can see they're very spiky and they go singly when they're coming out of the branches. You can see these slight little knobbles there. This is a dead twig, but there's little knobbles where the needles were growing. So it's quite rough and spiky. The bark is, well, it changes as it gets older. But this is what a young spruce looks like. It gets bigger scales as it gets older. But well, yeah, and also that's probably enough now. But yeah, this is a spruce tree. The roots are going to grow radially out from it. Spruce is quite a shallow plant. If you get an oak tree, the roots will go down almost as deep as the tree is tall. Very, very solid. They stand for 800 years. Spruces can live for a long time as well, but they tend to grow in North American areas where they don't grow their taproots down so deep. A lot of their root pan, it's a root pan, it spreads out and it's quite shallow. You'll often see in spruce plantations where trees have fallen over and you can see these lovely round sort of plates of roots. They would have had some roots going deeper, but a lot of them are quite shallow, which is useful for what we want. So at the bottom of the tree, there won't be much growing because too much shelter and too much acidic stuff from the needles that have fallen. There's actually quite a lot of Scots pine needles here from the Scots pine tree to our side here. But I'm going to pull away some of this mulchy topsoil. Beautiful stuff. Till I can get down to, I don't want to be too close to the tree actually, till I get down, here we go. Start finding these little roots. Now we don't want to take too many from one tree, obviously, because then the tree would not be able to pull in water and nutrients, and so it would fall over. So we're not going to do that. But so I've got this root here, and what I'm going to do is I've got to follow it back, and that's going underneath another one there. So I've got to unthread that, and I'm going to keep following it, and use my finger. You might want to get a small stick, and you can use a small stick to scrape along. Izzy, we'll be doing this with our groups soon. You will be helping teach this. Now I've come to a main group, a more main root here. See the joint there, T-junction. So this thin one, that's going to be great for something. So I'm going to actually break that off and set that aside. And this thicker one, that's going to be even more tough and strong. And I can just keep following it along. Now, if you have time and patience, I have one. Okay, no, I have neither of those at the moment. I'm not, but you can follow them out. You can get long, meters long roots like these. But I'm just going to pull off a little bit just for demonstration purposes. I'm just going to pull it and snap it here. But if I kept following one this thickness, you see on my hand how thick it is, that would probably be a meter or two long if you followed it from end to end. Now, I'm going to push over and heal all the mulch I pulled up. Press that down. The tree will not be too bothered. And I've got my thin root here and my thick root. Now these roots you can use as cordage straight away. When they're in use, when they're sort of woven into things, they will dry up quite hard. So it's not a flexible cordage for laces or something, but they're quite good for well, what I'll be showing you later.
Okay.
And I'm going to demonstrate just quickly. I'm going to put that in my pocket. Demonstrate just quickly. There's a few things you can do with this. You can use it as is like that, or you can use a thumbnail or the back of a knife or the edge of a blunt knife. I'm just using my thumbnail for now. And you scrape away this outer tegumen, would that be the word? I'm not sure. And you get down to this lovely pale root inside. And this is, well, it's also important to say thank you to the tree, I feel. So thank you, spruce tree. Very kind of you. Scrape it down. So you get this lovely pale root, which is beautiful and clean and makes for a nice colour for crafty projects and making things. And you can use it just like that if you like. And again, another step further, if you want to, this also helps it from not snapping, is you can split it in two. And this is quite fiddly. See how one side, you may not see the detail, but one of the split is thinner than the other. So it starts getting a bit fiddly, but we can split this root down using our thumbnails to split it as we go along to try and even up the split. And then when we've split it in half, we can either use the half as we are, or I'm just brushing that, or use those halves as they are, or you can then combine these together to make a slightly more flexible, more durable cordage. And you, where you twist, cross. Again, something to be taught in person, where it's not very easy to teach over the internet. Yeah, you twist that up, and you get a double weave cord, and that will be more bendy, more resilient and strong in the future. But yeah, and I haven't totally cleaned that up, but that's the quick and rough job. And we'll talk more about birch trees and their purposes, and not their purposes, their uses and things we can do with them after Stephen's story. So I'm going to hand over to Stephen, if that's okay. Emma, does he look prepared? Stuff. We can have some movement at the end.
Go for that. Go for that.
Thank you. That was a lovely story. I'm going to hand over camera ring to my camera professional here.
Highly professional.
Highly professional. So, now there's lots of things we can do with birch trees, as we were talking about. Collect the leaves, find a fairy of the woods to turn them into gold is a good one. The leaves here in the autumn turn gold amongst these trees, and we collect amongst them the real gold of the forest, the chanterelles, which are the same colour as the golden orangey leaves of the birch trees. But there's truth in that story. Now,
come away, Percy.
The dog has spotted that we have a stick here. So it's not a stick, it's a log. Now, your birch tree makes very good firewood. You have to dry it properly. That's how it goes that way up. The tree has to be dried for at least a year once you've cut it. And that's because this bark here is full of amazing oils, which makes it good firewood, but those oils are waterproof. So once your firewood is dry, you can put it that way up in the rain, and the rain will land on it and shed off, and it'll stay dry inside. But until it's dry, this will keep the moisture in the wood as well. So because of those oils, what we can do things like peeling off your bit of bark off the outside of the tree. And as a few of you will know well, this bark full of oils will burn exceptionally well. Look at that, all that oily smoke coming off there. Nature's firelighters. And it'll do that even straight off a living tree, even though this is off a dead, dry one, as long as it's the outer bark. I'm going to leave that down there for a second. So that's this outer bark here that we peel off the trees. And in some tree, in cases like this case, it actually goes really thick. That's about 1 millimeter thick. That's a lot of hefty firewood, firelighting stuff. And we can peel this apart into layers, barely a hairbreadth thick. And that's amazing. It's like natural firelighting paper. And you can I get maybe 10 sheets out of this layer here, because this was a big, thick and old tree. And it doesn't hurt the tree. The tree sheds this bark every year. You can see this loose outer layer. That's just coming off. That's what it sheds as it grows bigger and bigger. But if you were to chop down a living tree and peel it back more, in fact, you can also do this to the living tree. You can peel back right down to the inside of the tree, because in a living tree, all this wood, obviously this is just a quarter of the tree, the trunk would be this size. This hardwood here, this is dead wood. This is not alive anymore, which is why you can have hollow trees. This is all dead wood. The only living part of the tree is this tiny edge between my fingernails here. This edge here, that's the living thing. In fact, trees are incredibly thin, delicate, papery, fragile things clad over the hefty bulk of the dead heartwood that they grew in the past. So this heartwood is always dead, including in the tree behind me. And its outer layer, thin layer, which will be less than a centimetre thick, is the living layer. And you can see it here in this dead, dried log here. This is the living layer here. And this living layer here is xylem and phloem, full of tubes, sending water up from the ground and nutrients up to the leaves. And then the leaves are taking those nutrients and the water from the soil and carbon dioxide from the air and combining them to make oxygen and sugars and complex chemicals and things. That's food for the tree and in turn can be food for us. And then outside that layer, the xylem, phloem, basically the cambium layer, which includes the leaves as well, you have this dead bark, which is protection, which we can peel off and use. Now, you can carve a tree, you can cut with your knife down like this, and down here and there, and using the right tool. Now, you need to wait again till the sap's really rising, so another week or two, as we discussed earlier, and you can peel that off, and that you can then use. Now, that will damage the tree, but it was just a small bit this size on a tree this size. Leave it for a couple of years, few years, it'll heal up and we can harvest from it again. But it does damage the tree a bit, so it's better to wait until you're harvesting a tree for firewood and then peel it off. Now, as I say, this one is a dead log, it's been dried out, but I can still get this bark off. And if I use knives and more time, I could get bigger bits and be more careful. And we can then do stuff with this, so we can make crafts. Now, ideally, we take away some of the thicker, harder bark here, and then we want to soak it in the woods. I'm going to give this to the dog. You soak it in water. And I collected some yesterday. Now, this is a bit of a rush job, I have to admit. So apologies for the lack of fineness to it. But I collected a bit of that bark off one of these logs, soaked it overnight. And then in the morning, well, I'll demonstrate. You get yourself a hole punch. You get yourself a bit of bark, and using a hole punch, you could just use a needle or a knife and make a hole, but a hole punch will give you a neater finish and get a nice neat hole there. And then, if we remembered where we collected, where we put our birch, not our birch, our spruce roots that we collected up earlier, we can then use these spruce roots to sew the bark together into the shapes that we want, and that'll sew through like that. So this bit I collected here, it's a very rush job, so I apologize for the slightly messy sewing, but punching holes either side, threaded the spruce root through. I could have peeled it off a bit more, but I like the brown rusticy look, and that'll dry hard and solid. And I made a bigger hole up here and made a loop there to hang it from, and obviously sewed at the bottom. And we have a little pouch that we can put Emma's pocket knife in, which sits in there. That will sits in neatly, and that you can then hang from your pocket. You can make all sorts of things. There's some amazing stuff you can make by getting these bigger bits of bark peeled away, so it's just thin and bendy, and you can fold it just the right way. You don't actually need to use any sewing at all, and you fold it all up, and you can fold it together to make little pouches to put things in. A friend of ours, Willow Law, she has a beautiful knife sheath she made out of just birch bark, just folding it, folding neatly, and she stores her bushcraft, one of her bushcraft knives in it.
Bark origami. Exactly,
bark origami. And here's another thing very quickly I made. I didn't quite have as big enough a bit to make what I wanted to do, but I'm missing a bit. Oh, here we go. So yeah, me and Stephen were at a workshop again with Willow, and we took these leg bones. I think that was a leg bone of a young deer, and we cleaned out the insides and made little plugs out of birch wood, and there's a bit of birch bark there, layering it, and seals it. Now I can use this to store my salt, pepper, cooking spices, or needles. Another birch twig plug fits the top, and you've got a little pot there which you can store stuff in.
It's mine.
No, this is my one. Oh, you're showing yours.
Yeah, look, it's mine.
They're kind of spotlighted, so people probably can't see.
So, all right, with a nice little bone pin in it. That was cool. I remember that was a nice day out, wasn't it?
Lovely day up at the Green Lochen.
Yeah.
Stephen's is a bit fancier than mine because he's got more patience than me. And then I made a little sleeve out of a bit of birch bark sewn together with really fine spruce roots, which sewed it together, and that can make a little collar for hanging it, and I can then use that to put on a belt loop so I can carry my herbs and spices with me. So there's all these awesome things you can do with birch bark, but it goes further, So we look at this big hard bit, it's quite tough. And because of this waterproof layer with all this oil, these make really good tiles. I've seen houses in Norway which genuinely have birch bark tiles on the roofs, and they'll last at least 5 years, maybe more. I'd actually know for sure. They last a long time. The water can't get through the bark, so it doesn't rot. It just stays there dry and everything. Wonderful stuff. And the dog has just shown that it's also great for chewing on. And that might be because you get betulanic acid, because of course the Latin name of birch is betula. There's the Betula pendula, Betula pubescens, 2 different types we have in Scotland, and then which hybridize a lot. And betulanic acid, we can make all sorts of things from, antiseptics and stuff. And I believe there's also a certain amount of salicylic acid, which is what we make aspirin out of in it as well. Willow's the best source, but birch is good too. So, some of the things we can do with birch, thank you, Emma. And we can wander down the woods here, and you can see how it all grows. It's such a great colonizer. So this area of hillside here, all these young trees, was cleared about 20 years ago. They felled all the trees and harvested them, because that's what most of the trees are in Scotland, are a crop. And the first ones to come back in, as it was allowed to regenerate naturally, were all these birch trees. And so we have a big forest of them. Leave this long enough, we'll get some other things coming in. There's a Scots pine there, and eventually maybe we might get hardwoods like oak and, harder hardwoods. Birch is a soft hardwood. Oak is a hard hardwood. Degrees of wood quality. Oh, look at this tree here. This is a great one. So that bark that we were collecting earlier. Some trees will just have lots of this stuff we can collect for lighting fires. And other trees, same size, same age, same species, next to nothing on it for us to take off. It's a curious phenomenon. So you find one that's generous. There are places where there are extremely generous trees. And we talk about silver birches with their silver bark. But then we get ones like this. That's reddy, purpley brown. That's not silver at all. It's silver further up. Good point. Thank you, Emma. Yeah. And then some of them get this this gnarly, tougher bark lower down. And if you see this is about waist height. Well, no, about chest height. So if you tried chewing on that, if you were a deer, you wouldn't get anywhere. No satisfaction at all. That tree is safe from browsing. Whereas higher up, it doesn't need that tough, gnarly bark, so it doesn't have it. So the bark here is thinner and more fragile, so it doesn't need to protect the tree from browsing. Which does suggest, looking at the height of these, they are tough, gnarly, chewable bark, not chewable bark. The highest bit is about head height to me, which is browsing height for a fallow deer or a roe deer, whereas red deer might be able to browse a bit higher up, but probably wouldn't. Now I'm wondering, before we either finish up or Stephen does some movement stuff, if we can see if there's been any sap collecting from our sycamore tree, because it's a bigger sycamore tree than the birch tree we had, and sycamore trees are just a bit more enthusiastic with this stuff. We have a steady trickle coming down here, not a lot, but there's an Emma in the background. You look lovely in the background, my love. There's a little bit collected at the bottom there. If I come back tomorrow, I'm going to see what I can do with that. Maybe do something exciting like boil it down, but as Stephen was saying, I need quite a lot. I might just drink it for health properties. Stephen, just before we go, actually, I love this tree here. It's like two trees hugging, and they're growing together. I think it's rather sweet. Anyway, Stephen, it's 25 past. Shall we call it a day, or do you think we should do a bit of movement?
I think we've done it. I don't